who is Sherman. Can we cut over to the next slide, please? Cut over to my good friend, Dr. Anton. Dr. Anton is a very important individual here in the cloud computing chapter. And the funny side note, Dr. Anton always like to joke about this. So Dr. Anton has been in the IT industry for pretty much as long as I have been alive. So he's a very, very knowledgeable man. He knows all the ins and outs. And funnily enough, Dr. Anton have also joked about this. Dr. Anton used to work at many of the big principal technology companies, the IBMs, the CAs, the Sun Microsystems of the world. But there was a certain point of time which I think he said, I'm done with it. I'm done working for other people. And he has successfully transitioned into the world of entrepreneurship. So now, while he is the founder of GICT training, as well as Smart Law, among a few of the companies that he helps to run, most importantly, he is also the president of the Singapore Computer Society's Cloud Computing chapter. Maybe Dr. Anton, over to you for a quick kickoff to today's event.
Thank you, Brian. You sort of embarrassed me, disclose my age, vintage. Nevertheless, thanks so much for the kind introduction. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for taking time to be part of today's events. I must firstly thank Brian from Google, who is the MC today. And secondly, I must also thank Camilla Ko from SCS Secretariat. And thirdly, I must also thank all Brian's colleagues from Google for putting this event together. Now, let me say a few words about the cloud computing chapter. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, what you see is the Cloud Exco members. Many of us have been around with the cloud chapter for quite some time, including myself. Particularly over the last 5-6 years, we have been very actively involved in creating greater awareness and visibility of the technology as it continues to unfold. With regards to that, we have been running events pretty much every other month, pre-COVID at the National Library Board, and now we have transitioned into virtually delivering these sessions like today. Now, what you see is the Exco members. We have a great mix of people. We have many veterans from the industry. We do have folks from the academia, the vice provost of SMUs, from Nanyang Poly, and also from IMDA and the others. So as a team together, and may I have the next slide, please? We do have others also co-opted members. We take time to deliver these events with the sole view of promoting technology and creating greater awareness. These events are complementary, and all of us who do these events are volunteers. Next slide, please. Yeah. As you could see, in 2021, we have so far had several events. In March, we had the AGM. The new Exco was elected. I must highlight, if I may have the next slide, please. Yes, we do have a flagship annual conference every year. And this year, in spite of the COVID, we had a very successful event. It was a hybrid event. We had an attendance of nearly 360 folks. We were covered in the media. On that note, let me have the next slide, please. The next flagship annual event is going to be in February of next year. The theme is Innovating Digital Services on Cloud for the New Normal. I hope to see some of you participate in one form or the other. So that's about it. On that note, let me take a few minutes and say a few things about today's topic. And now allow me to touch on that, given that we have a very wide audience of nearly, I'm told, close to 200, if my counting numbers are correct. I thought of extending a refresher in a few minutes at a high level, and then allow the other two speakers to deep dive into it. Well, as Brian said, lately we have been hearing a lot about Kubernetes, and if I pronounce that correctly, which is a Greek word. And in spite of that, it is now popularly known as K8s or even K8 and Q. So I will refer to it as K8 for the rest of my talk. And let me say a few things. But in today's session, I'm sure my other two speakers will try and address, firstly, what is K8? Why is its popularity exploding in the cloud? What is that behind the bus? Is it hype? Is it really taking off? And most importantly, if yes, why? I think that is a lot to ask for and a lot to answer in a short span of an hour. I'm sure you would agree with that. But we will try and do our best to cover the pertinent points with a view to creating greater awareness, as I said earlier on. So for the next few minutes, let me briefly address the following. What is K8 or K8s or Cube, and why? Similarly, why? Let me take you a step back and discuss what is virtual machines, containers, VMs versus containers, and lastly, also, I thought I must touch at least a few sentences, Docker versus V8, to be fair to all, because there is a burgeoning debate with regards to Docker versus K8, and I'll touch on that. Now, as you all know, K8 was launched by Google in 2014, but it is now controlled by the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. It has now grown to be a de facto tool for two reasons. Clearly, next slide, please. Hang in there. For orchestrating containers and running distributed applications. Computing is all about applications. Now, from a market perspective, the most profound finding is that K8 usage has skyrocketed significantly to a whopping 48% this year from a 28% just a couple of years ago. So circling back, what is K8 or Cube? The short answer, the simple answer is it has taken containerization to the highest level possible today. And why do I say that? Is because of this. And let me take one step back. And if I can have the next slide. In the traditional infrastructure, hardware infrastructure, we all know that we run our apps on a physical server and try to grab all resources that we can. The only challenge with this architecture is when we run up multiple applications, we run into problems of resources. We just pray and hope that one of those apps don't hog the resources. Because of this, one major problem is the scalability. It becomes a challenge. Now, VMs is an improvement on this, I'm sure you all would agree, because of one thing particularly, something known as abstraction from the physical hardware, thus enabling us to run multiple apps on one physical server or one virtual machine that can access from multiple physical servers. So that's about abstraction. Secondly, virtual machines also allows us to run instances of our own operating system. Hence, we can isolate each app in its own virtual machine, thus reducing the chance that applications running on the same underlying physical hardware will not impact each other. In short, we can run multiple applications without having to be worried too much about hogging the resources. Further, we know that virtual machines are disposable. What do I mean by that? When we no longer need to run the app, you take down the virtual machine and thus freeing the much needed resource. Next slide, please. Now, let me quickly touch on containers. Containers, on the other hand, as we all know, has taken the abstraction one step higher. Containers are the, if you will, the latest point or last mile of IT with respect to two things. One, again, infrastructure automation, and secondly, abstraction to a next level. Basically, as you see it on the slide, it is an executable unit of software which is contained as a package of application code together with libraries and dependencies so that it can be run anywhere, whether it be a mobile device or in the cloud or a PC or any hardware device that has processing capability. Next slide, please. Now, quickly, the benefits of containers vis-a-vis, let's say, virtual machine. Forget about traditional hardware. It's all there. To be specific, besides sharing underlying hardware infrastructure, as in the case of virtual machines, containers also share underlying virtualized operating system. Containers, in short, both share the hardware infrastructure as well as the virtualized OS. Hence, containers offer the same benefits of virtual machine, that is isolation, scalability, and disposability, but because they don't carry the payload of their own operating systems instances, they are much lighter, they take up less space, thus allowing us to run more apps on fewer machines. In short, you code once and run anywhere. Next slide, please. Now, coming back to K8, as I said, as we all know, Google launched this in 2014. Now it's run and operated and managed by CNCF. But the thing is, KS or K8S has taken containerization, the concept of it, to a much higher level. Basically, it assists you in handling some of the operational difficulties when deploying and managing multi-containers. I must underscore multi-containers. And I must also underscore running multiple applications on multiple hosts. So that's where the K8 value comes vis-a-vis containers. K8 distributes and schedules containerized apps across a cluster of physical or virtual machines, as we know, rather than running them on one single server. This way, apps running in K8 function like a single entity, although they may actually comprise an assortment of loosely coupled containers. What you see is multiple containers running at the same time. While the promise of containers is to code once and run anywhere, as I said earlier, K8 provides the potential to orchestrate and manage all your container resources from a single plane. It helps with networking, load balancing, security, and scaling across all K8 nodes, which runs your containers. To sum it up, it's an open source container orchestration platform, nothing but an orchestration platform, which presents two distinct features. One of them is to automate any deployment. Secondly, it automates management and scaling of multiple apps. Next slide, please. Lastly, let me say a few words, as this debate is very common in today's containerization world, which is basically Docker versus K8. Although most of us think or like to compare between K8 and Docker, the two technologies are not exchangeable. You cannot choose one over the other. They are essentially discrete technologies that can perfectly complement each other when creating, delivering, and scaling containerized applications. The point here is they are discrete technologies and certainly not exchangeable. In fact, to conclude, the best at par comparison would be Docker Swarm versus K8 for those who are familiar with it. But I think I'll leave that for the next session, given the limited time frame that we have. On that note, I hope I've given you a snapshot of the transformation from traditional infrastructure, traditional hardware, to VM, to containers, to K8 today, and the value proposition they present in brief. Let me thank once again for all of you for attending this session, and I hope you will enjoy the rest of it. Let me pass you on back to Brian on that note. Thank you so much.
Awesome.